Welcome, everyone. I think I had a problem with settings this time because I thought it was going to be a webinar, but obviously it's not, but it's fine. Welcome, everyone. I request everyone who's not on the panel to please turn off your video and please turn off your voice. And then let's start. So yeah, this is the second episode we are having, and we are going to be having a series of them. I decided to call it Moments with Africa because I'm intentionally trying to bring African voices to these conversations. I want to center African experiences because, as we all know, this is something very global. It's very common to have one Black person on a panel. It's very common to have one Black person in a team, one person working in an organization, in a department, or whatever it is. It's very, very common to have just one of us. And I don't think having just one African represents what we are about or fully covers our stories or experiences. So this is very, very intentional. I want people to be able to see our diversity, to see our experiences, to understand our needs, to understand the stolen stories, the forgotten stories, all that. And the only way we can do that is to first make sure that there's several of us in a room. Several of us can be heard, because you can be in a room, but you're not really included, or you're not really heard. And also, I want to make it consistent. So the consistency is very important as well, so that people don't forget us. People don't forget that, you know what, there are Africans living in this country. There are Africans living in this country. There are Africans like Chipo, who are lawyers running their own law firms. There are Africans like Jayson from South Africa living in a very different part of the world. There are educators like Cheikh living in another totally different part of the world from Senegal. So this again is very, very intentional. And I hope that when you see us and when you listen to us, and also when you see us speak to one another, being able to, to agree or not to agree on a point, then you're able to humanize us and you're able to start seeing us as the people we are. Because unfortunately, our stories have been told by other people. And because of that, we have not been humanized. So we are trying to make corrections, but then we need for people to understand that it's not easy, number one. But yeah, it's a start. We have to start somewhere. So again, telling African stories. I want us to start looking at the history. What is Africa? What do we know as Africa? What are our different stories? Who were the narrators? Who were the leaders of our communities? Who were our teachers? What were our beliefs? What were our cultures? What was our spirituality? What did we believe in? What did we want as people? And I know this is, one person is not going to be able to cover all this, or 4 or 5 people, but it's a start. And let us start with Cheikh. Maybe you could just give us an introduction about the panel you're leading, because you're going to be leading on African storytelling and education. And just let us know what we need to know, and then open the conversation for the rest of the panelists. Please, let's remember that you could always send your questions in the Q&A. This time, I think it's a bit different because it was supposed to be a webinar and there's a Q&A, but I guess this time the chat is open to everyone. Who am I going to ask? So Shai, could you tell me whether you can access the chat? If you can hear me, turn on your microphone. Or anyone else, can you access the chat properly?
Yes, I can. I just sent a message in there now.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So make sure that be very free, send your comments there. Then we're going to have a Q&A later. And by the way, if there's not too many of us, maybe we can actually have a conversation before we get there. But for now, let's keep there are no strict rules here, but let's just keep the microphones on, the videos on, off, so that the person leading the panel can be able to guide us, and also let the panelists have a conversation. And then let's see what happens after that. Thank you so much. Cheikh, the floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is 7 a.m. in Martinique. I would like to thank Mary for putting this panel, and I'm so glad to be talking to my fellow Africans, this amazing panel. So I am a scholar and very interested in African stories and agency. So I would like to start with a quote that would speak to you. Wherever Europe went in the globe, it planted its memory. When Prospero first arrives at the Caribbean island inherited by Caliban from his mother Sycorax, he learns everything about the island from its own native and then renames whatever Caliban shows him. The great lake that links Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, and the most important source of the Nile becomes Lake Victoria. It is in the naming of the landscape that we can so clearly see the layering of one memory over another, a previous native memory of place buried under another, a foreign alluvium becoming the new visible identity of a place. This is a quote by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the great Kenyan writer. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is among those African intellectuals who were very committed in fostering African agency. Early on, he called his fellow African writers and scholars to join him in moving the center, that is colonial Europe, in decolonizing language learning, that is English, but also, most importantly, in decolonizing the mind. Over the years, some African writers joined him in calling for what we call decolonization or Africanization. So I would like to remind briefly the different sources of knowledge, what I mean, the archives that exist and allows everyone to construct Africa the way he wants, from his own position and from his own perspective. The first one is pre-colonial Africa. That source includes three aspects. The first one is the Christian archive. The second one is the Islamic archive. And the last one is the oral archive, that is the griot archive. The griot archive, those African griot who were like spoken words and so on and so on. The second source starts from the 15th to the 19th century. That is the colonial archive. That colonial archive is very important because it impacted African lives. From the colonial archive, Africans and Africa has been named, given different names, but within the colonial archives emerged some counter narratives. We have one example, that is African personality, that has been developed by Edward Wilmot Blyden, who was saying Africans have an identity, they were expressing themselves. Later on, we have other expressions like vindicationism, African Americans vindicating their identity as Black people. And later on, we have negritude and then Pan-Africanism and other isms that have been developed over the years. But the most important, the second source is the post-colonial source. The post-colonial source started from the 1960s and 1970s. It is a reaction. From then on, Africans start now expressing themselves and defining themselves. But the problem is we were defining ourselves using other terms that were not forged by us. That is where the problem lies. Many intellectuals, scholars, writers, either in Africa or the diaspora, started to forge new concepts. We have Pan-Africanism that was the most important one that we know today. Some says it is still alive, others say it died. But I believe it is still alive. We need to really reshape what Pan-Africanism was from the beginning. So what is important about the 1970s and 1960s is we had what we call Africanization. That's the word that I like, Africanization. It means to foster an education system that is rooted in our values. Because African systems, I can tell you, are more open to the world in learning other histories and cultures than European systems are willing to learn about Africa. This is obvious. I am a native of Senegal, and before leaving my country, I have studied French. I have studied all French writers. I have studied most British writers that I can teach also. And I did not meet a European who is fully capable of telling you about African stories. And that is a problem. So naming is the center, naming, what we call naming. Can we have the ability of naming ourselves? And how do we name ourselves? If we remember, there is one great intellectual who I refer to most of the time, that is Du Bois, William Du Bois, who is an African American. He said about double consciousness that that sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of the others. We always define ourselves through the eyes of the others. That duality is not helping us to find the way we want. So unless we name ourselves, we cannot define an education system. So what Africa needs is a strong education system that is not a copy do it. Like if we copy the same systems, we will not really succeed in finding self-esteem. Self-esteem is a keyword that I always use when I talk to kids. Self-esteem, that is knowing who you are and where you come from. It is very important because you are rooted somewhere, and then you can now be open. Before you are open to others, you know who you are first. What is important in education system that I know about Africa is we had sense of community. Sense of community has always been part of African indigenous education, but it disappeared over the years. We know the philosophy of Ubuntu, we all know it. But what I did see over the years is it has been captured and turned into something else. Ubuntu is very interesting. It is a philosophy of life, and it carries humanity, personhood, and dignity. Ubuntu existed in Sierra Leone also. Sierra Leone, they say, what belongs to me is destroyable by fire or water. What belongs to us is destroyable neither by water or fire. That is from Sierra Leone. That existed years back. So in African cultures, in African proverbs, there are many teachings that can be used to give a new direction to our education systems. And we are not doing that. What African curriculum designers are lacking is that courage to really design an education system that is grounded in some sort of values. Openness is okay, I know that. We are living in a world that is globalized, we can understand that. We need to have a job, we need to travel, all of that is important. But first of all, define an education system that might include those aspects and values, and then we can talk to the others. Because Africans are willing to talk to others. It is known and obvious. We are more willing to talk to others than others are willing to talk to us. That is something we can, I have multiple examples. So over the years, I have been studying how education can help move Africa to another direction. One intellectual that I would like to quote is John Mara. John Mara is one of those few African intellectuals who says Pan-African education is a must. He says that. It is a book, a very interesting book that I recommend you. Pan-African education is a must. So for Africa to survive, it needs to develop Pan-African education. And when he says Pan-African education, it's not an education that is based on, hate or rejecting all the philosophies or sources of knowledge, but an education system that would give Africa its true image. Because the history as it has been, the periodization of history as we learn it in Africa is not the way it should be. That is known, it is not the way it should be. But also we spend too much time on panels like decolonisation. Decolonization is a word that I don't really like. I know it needs to be the process. The process needs to be finished. I know the process, but like the word as we use it, because others are using it the same way we use it.
Yeah.
And when those who dominate it as use the concept, we have to be aware. So when they validate a concept, they mean it has no, like I would say, no weight of emancipation. They know it. But when they start rejecting a concept, then there is something behind it. Let me give you an example. We heard about Afropolitanism. It is well accepted as a concept. Afropolitan, we are Afropolitan, like Achille Mbembe, the Cameroonian philosophers who talk about Afropolitanism. We are Afropolitan. Others say Afropeanism. Afropeanism, it is a concept that exists in Europe. We are African and European at the same time. And it is promoted by one writer whose name is Leonardo Miano. Leonardo Miano. He's a well-known African writer and a star in Europe. There's also the concept of Afrofuturism. They join us in using the concept Afrofuturism. Africa is the future. Africa will be the new place to be. You know, all of that. They join us in like clapping hands. But when you say Afrocentricity, they back up. Why? Because Afrocentricity says we have to talk from our own position, that is Africa. We have to rule out like those colonial archives and goes deep in African concept, indigenous knowledge, and that is a problem. We have now accusations of it is not scientific. What they're doing is not scientific. It is not scholarship. They call us Nile scholars. Do you know the term Nile scholars? Those writers who are labeled as Nile scholars, what they study is not something that is true history. They're African-centered, like scholars who are just like telling something that is not true. Like Cheikh Anta Diop from Senegal, Molefi Asante, that is an African-American. All those writers who were trying to define a true African identity, they are called on using mythology. All they are telling is just mythology that does not even exist and will not move Africa forward. But when Europeans validate a concept, that we can build our future project. And there's what is the problem.
I have a question. You've mentioned, I have so many questions. You've said so much, and I'm so excited. And I'm already thinking, because you started with names. We have to first know our names. And now I'm just thinking literally, the names even of the names of our languages. Some of our languages have names that have not really come from us or have been semi-colonized. Then our own names. My name is Mary. Mary is not a Kikuyu name. My name is Mary Njoki Waweru. So Njoki Waweru is Kikuyu, but Mary is not. But I remember that during colonial rule, our grandparents and our parents had to use British names in order to be accepted. So it wasn't a choice. If you wanted to exist in the system where you're under British colonial rule, you had to be more like them. And the best way to be more like them is to adopt their name. So you also mentioned something about fear and validation. But I want to ask the entire panel, what are we scared about? Are we scared that we have to start all over again and build our own systems, whether it's educational systems, political systems, economic systems, because it's going to be a whole entire, it has to be complete work. What are we scared? Are we scared of the work, or are we scared of not receiving the validation we will be looking for? Because many times whatever we are doing is because we are seeking validation, because we are already in a system that requires for us to get that validation to exist. So I want to understand what you think about that, the fear and the validation and the systems. What do we do? Why are we not doing it?
Yeah. So what I would like to say is colonialism, I would say, is so embedded. It really embedded, and it would take time and courage to deconstruct all that narrative. It really requires courage to deconstruct that narrative, but we are lacking that courage because we are surrounded, I would say. That is the way I can say it, surrounded. We have many foreign agencies working with us. Everything we have to do it with them. Paternalism is the problem. Paternalism. Paternalism can be open, it can be really hidden in a way, and it is today it is hidden. Our education system works because we get some kind of help or some orientation. Our programs are directed to something that is from an external, I would say, agency saying we have to work on teaching this or that, math, technology, agriculture, not all of that, because we have land in Africa. So that would have been maybe the way forward. But because we are not controlling the way we would like to learn, we cannot really, I would say, design our own education system because we are lacking that courage. But also we have governments who have many cooperation links, and those corporations are sometimes hindrance. Sometimes it is hindrance. I'm not saying to be closed, we need corporations because we are not living alone in this on this planet, but how we construct ourselves before first going to the others. We have to construct ourselves. This is really needed because everywhere you go to Africa, you see colonization. It is so open-minded, so open and visible. Those who don't see it, I don't understand. Those who don't see it, I don't really understand. I myself sometimes I wish I know nothing because it angers me and I'm so tired seeing it. I'm tired seeing it. So if I could close my eyes, pretend I don't see it, I would do it. But I see it everywhere.
Can I follow up with a question? Oh, please go, Chipo. I think you raised your hand.
Sorry, thank you, Olu. As Mary said, he said a lot, so I had a lot of things. So I'm just going to throw out a few thoughts. So I recently listened to a lecture by Professor, I forgot her first name, Nyambuya. She's Kenyan as well. And she mentions in that, you know, again, we're captured. And that's what colonization is. Our minds are captured. The way we're thinking is captured. Because the colonization also shapes how we think, how we even approach the entire process. So the notion of decolonization is also something that we then have to define ourselves. And so we have to say what decolonization, decoloniality, Africanization is. And you know, and as the saying goes, you have to know where you've been to know where you're going. So in that, you know, that deconstructing is what we have to, you know, like you're saying, is what we have to do, and that's the difficulty. And I think it is a fear, and I think the fear plays at many levels because we have to deconstruct our identity. That's very destabilizing. And that's destabilizing emotionally, it's destabilizing spiritually, it's destabilizing psychologically. And so as we you know, approach that subconsciously, I think we know and we are aware that, you know, we're going to have to face all of these destabilizations because that's essentially like a trap that's built into our mind by the colonizers. And then it manifests as, oh, we're fearful of not being validated by the colonizer. No, it's not that. It's deeper than that. It's that acknowledgement that we have been defined by the other, and we have to unpack everything and redefine and define ourselves. So that's probably what I say, and that's what that and all of that is in the essence of the capture of the being captured. Is what I would say.
I mean, I feel like Chipo already answered my question in a very funny way. My question really was going to be how much of this really is fear, right? In the sense that, I mean, I truly believe that very deep down subconsciously, we are scared of violence. And I think that this is passed down because a lot of our ancestors, if I may put it that way, had to experience violence and teach us certain things and how to behave, but they may not necessarily have told us why they did that. I'll give you an example. Typical example is religion, right? In the sense, right? You know, I mean, there's certain religions that we practice, or I mean, for those who maybe I should make it a bit nicer, the particular kind of religion, for example, Christianity we practice in some sense, was one that proliferated through the continent via colonization, right? And many of our ancestors had to readjust their ways of life because they had to adopt this colonizer's way of life, right? And they taught us these things over the years, but probably didn't tell us, oh, this is the reason why. So you know what, break from it. So you kind of pass on that knowledge. And so today we carry those attitudes and those cultures without actually fully understanding why we do what we are doing, where we are coming from. And I think that deep down there's a fear that, you know, if we don't align ourselves, and I say that not just, I mean, it starts from our leadership, right? I mean, there's leadership that's greedy, but we have to also understand there's leadership that's also fearful, right? In some sense. So that was my question, was how much of this is really embedded in fear? And I think that the solution really, which might be hard, is the educational piece, right? So get people to really understand that no matter how this goals are presented to you, you know, the SDGs and all of these beautiful things, right? That the nature of these people is double speak, right? That if you look at the trend of the impact, I did NYC in Nigeria, maybe, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago, where everybody was shouting SDG goals, you know what I mean? And their goal really is to keep you working for them, like it was during colonization, right? So, I mean, just like you were talking about Cheikh around like how people don't see it. It's like to make people really see it and say, you know, if you really want to move forward, do not think that Europe is what like will give you a better life, because there's always this comparison around, you know, like, why can't we be this? It's our fault. You know, even Africans have started to think that Africans themselves have inherently a problem, which is a big problem because this is the idea that they sold to us that we are. And it is so sad that even Africans believe this today, right? I mean, that was really my question. I think Chipo answered a little bit of that, but I'll just add that the educational piece and structuring it through the educational system, tackling that is probably a very big, and that's why they are very, very, very involved in that. I mean, those who are Kenyans, I don't know, it was recently that some of this organization was suggesting Kenya doesn't need more universities in order to cut like money. You know, the whole goal of colonization was to give you high school, enough education for you to do work for them, but not enough for you to think about yourself to be independent. I mean, that's the whole point, right? So this is really where I think needs to be tackled seriously so that people really come to the understanding that, you know, it's like the training you give children where they're like, if somebody wants to give you a sweet, right? Reject it from the stranger because they'll probably kidnap you from it. This is really the kind of like education that we need to teach our people.
Yeah, and if I would like just to react briefly to what Olu pointed. That is very important. This mindset of always like judging our societies, looking at something that happens in Europe, even like a century ago. I see that I listen to some of my colleagues based in African universities. Most of the time, they're likely to quote something that happened in the 15th century, I would say, or 17th century Britain, to explain something that is happening in their local villages, something I will never understand. And even if you are to study, for example, the local economy in Kenya or Tanzania or Senegal, you might go back to the periodization that is since the fall of the Berlin Wall. So what is the link between the fall of the Berlin Wall and like the market, the local market that is not operating because our leaders are not doing what they should be doing? So this is one of the problems. And at the same time, we are not having conversations among ourselves. We don't have conversations. I can say that because I am a Senegalese who happened to study English, and that allows me to be more open to than my other fellow Senegalese. So I can talk to Kenyans, I can talk to Tanzanians, and also I'm very interested in going to see and understand and talk to my fellow African. I do that wherever I go. So because we are not having cooperation within Africa, so we are more likely to have cooperations between our former colonial masters. That's something we value, we like, and we love. We can even compete that my colonizer is better than your colonizer. We don't say it, but we live it. We live it. This is happening. We live it.
Actually, we say it. We do say it. And I'm sorry to cut you short. We do say it, especially in East Africa. We have this thing where Kenyans make fun of Tanzanians because people in Tanzania are more about Kiswahili. They learn in Kiswahili. They do everything in Kiswahili. They will chat with you in Kiswahili. But Kenyans, as Kenyans, we think it's much better to speak in English because
Exactly.
we're speaking in English. And it's really sad.
It's really sad because in my country, for example, we can have conversations for weeks about a prime minister or an MP who made a mistake speaking French. We can have a conversation on that. We compete that I am the one who speaks French better than the other. What is the outcome of speaking French or English the better way? What is the outcome? So if you talk, yes, come on, Chipo, yes, come.
I was going to say, the thing is, where I see it, again, in the sub-region here in West Africa, because, we're French, we're English, and we see it like when we talk about which of their colonizers is the best. Oh no, the French people, so I mean, and we all know the Francophonie and how France has captured, so much of the narrative of the so-called post-colonial narrative of Francophone Africa and Francophone West Africa. So much so, that the Ivorians and this is well known, think of themselves, everyone else in West Africa knows this. The Ivorians think of themselves as French.
Yeah.
And so many of the Francophonie, so many of the Anglophone and the Francophone, we have these arguments about, it is better to have been under British colonization than under French colonization. I mean, those are actual conversations that I have. That I'm like, I don't care what colonization is. Colonization is you're still captured. Just because you're captured in a different way, you're still captured. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's possible it's believable, and it continues to happen because everything around us is colonialism. So if you go to your place of worship and you're supposed to worship according to Europeans or any other group of people, and then you go to the shops and everything is done according to how foreigners do them, the things we eat, the way we do agriculture, the way we do everything, the way we dress as well. If you have to dress more like a Westerner than your mother or your aunties, I mean, all this is why people are now bragging that, I'm more French than I am African, or I am more British than I am African. This is why, because every single place is telling us it's not okay to be you. It's not right for you to be you. You're supposed to be something else. And I just briefly mentioned, like when you go to different places, you see different things. Even in the church, when you go to the church, they're telling you that, African spirituality is not it. So of course, you're going to want to be like the people who brought the religion to you. And in my case, it was the missionary, it was the European people who brought Christianity to my people. And now, thank you so much, Cheikh. I wish we had more time to discuss the kind of conversations we're going to have. Maybe we will do that after we discuss the next two topics. Thank you so much, Cheikh. Jayson is going to come in next because I think spirituality is something that we never talk about. Myself, I think over the last, I've only been able to, openly speak about it the last several years publicly, because it's not something that is allowed. If you're a Christian, especially when you come into countries like Kenya, then you are not allowed to question. But again, this is changing. I'm seeing this online. I'm seeing this with, even when I speak to my elder sister, she's much older than I am, but I can now have a conversation with her and tell her, you know what, I do not follow these religions anymore. And she's okay with it. And we're going to have a conversation, even though she's a staunch Christian. But this will not have happened, let's say, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. But now people are becoming more open-minded. But I want Jayson to introduce spirituality and our beliefs. Let us know, where did we start? Where are we now? Did we go wrong? Do we have any hope? Can we reclaim our spirituality and our beliefs before colonialism? Thank you.
100%. Definitely. I just want to introduce myself before I start, so that people know who I am and where I'm from. My name is Jayson Williams. I go by Turner Williams, as that was my mother's maiden name. But I am from South Africa, what is known as South Africa, Cape Town. My ancestry spans throughout Africa. On my mother's side, I'm part Malawian. My grandfather was from Malawi, and my grandmother, her heritage comes from the freed slaves that returned from the US to Africa, and part European. And on my father's side is Xhosa. So my grandfather was Zama Kibelo. Kibelo also means Saturday. And I grew up in Cape Town as colored. So I don't know if many of you know the colored identity. And so I grew up with the colored identity. I was told I'm not Black, I'm not African. And these were the terminologies I grew up with. And just growing up, looking in the mirror, looking at my hair, I'm like, no, there's something wrong with this story. There's something wrong with this narrative. And I questioned it from a young age. And I recall asking my parents about the history. Where are we from? What is our story? And unfortunately, there was not a lot of information to be found. There was just a little bit in terms of knowing where my great-grandparents are from, but not further than that. And to me, that was really sad. But I also took the opportunity to learn more about the cultures that are not only in South Africa, but broader. It was only when I moved to Canada, because I was also under the impression that, oh, I need to leave Africa to get a better life. And that misunderstanding of what it means to be African, that misunderstanding of what it means to be human. But beyond that, I moved to Canada, learned about indigenous ways of being, and discovered that I'm indigenous, because that was one thing that was not taught where I'm from. I did not learn that I was from the land, that I'm indigenous, and that I have a role to play in terms of where I'm from. Once I discovered this knowledge over the last 7 years, I started digging deeper. I started learning about African history, like Cheikh mentioned, learning about pre-colonial Africa, learning about the period between the 15th century to the 19th century, and also understanding where we are now, learning about it. And when I started learning about ancient Africa, when I started learning about Kemet, when I started learning about the different regions of Africa and how these civilizations existed successfully before colonization, then I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much wealth here, there's so much beauty, there's so much power. But it starts with knowledge. And it starts with, like Cheikh said, naming, understanding names. When we say African, what do we mean? Who's African? What is African? That is the first question we should be asking. When we talk about African, what are we talking about? Does African include people who came from Europe that still think they're from Europe? Are they African too? Like, these are the questions we should be asking. There's a lot of African people who do not think like Africans because their minds have been colonized and they're still captured. So they look African. They look African, and we see it in our leadership. We see it in the governance of our countries that are in Africa. But is our thinking African? Because African is not just an identity where you are just living in African. It's a way of being. And I'm coming to African spirituality now. African spirituality is simply understanding who you are within the context of Africa, knowing your history and knowing where you are going. And that is something that we really need to capture. We need to recapture that. Understanding the land, how the land is part of Africa. The land that the African land is part of our identity. That's the truth. And we need to come back to this understanding so that we can be connected. And there's one more thing I'm going to say, and it might rattle a few of us in this room, but we really need to move beyond the ideas of countries. Because this concept of countries is really crippling us, even within the African context. Before colonization, there was no such thing as we never lived in countries. We had natural borders, not these artificial man-made borders. And the sad thing is that was part of the divide and conquer tactic that was used by the oppressor. They came and they used this tactic to divide us by splitting up our continent and then telling certain people within these contexts, you are better than the other one. And then we start fighting against each other within our countries. And the sad part is many African groups, like tribes, were split along these colonial borders. There are tribes that are living, historically, they would encompass 3, 4, 5 African countries because that's how large they are, like a family. But they've been split because of these colonial borders. And now there's civil war, antagonism. In South Africa, there's this thing called xenophobia, where we are treating other Africans as if they are not worthy to be here. And we're saying, don't come to our land, stay on your land. Like, it's all one. It's all one. We are one. And we need to come to this realization. We need to come to this understanding that we are one. This is what Bob Marley was singing about when he was singing Africa Unite, because Bob Marley understood that the only way for Africa to be free is to unite, and not just unite in terms of, okay, we're all going to just become one nation, but there's more things we need to understand. We need to understand who we are, where we come from, and we shouldn't erase the colonial history either. We shouldn't erase it. We should rename, we should replace, we should come up with new things. But we should remember, we should always remember this part of our history, because this has been a major lesson and part of our growth. It's been horrible, it's been sad, it's been oppressive, but we need to remember this period, this chapter, and the last few chapters. We need to have it because it's part of our story. This is also part of our story. But coming back to African spirituality, we need to understand that Africa is the home of humanity. Humanity started in Africa. Scientists have agreed that the first humans have come from Africa, and they've left the African continent to go and spread out throughout the world. With that knowledge, we can also believe that African spirituality globally started in Africa, because the human connection and the context of understanding what it means to be human and how to navigate in this world came from Africa. The same with language. Language came from Africa. Writing started in Africa. Some people say Mesopotamia, but Africa, if humanity started in Africa and we move from here, then obviously language, stories, the art of telling stories started here. And we really need to get back to telling stories. The oral traditions shouldn't be erased. We should continue telling oral stories as well as written stories and videos. We should use multiple forms of media to tell our stories and to perpetuate our own narratives. That is what I would like to share. I have a couple of questions as well. I'm not sure if I can share my screen, but is there anyone that wants to maybe share any thoughts they have or want to contribute anything? Yes.
I have a question, because I'm trying to look at the role of spirituality, and not just you yourself as a person, me myself as a person, but its role in how we relate with one another, because we know that spirituality, like religion for many people, it starts with the person, the relationship you have with the creator. But I think for African spirituality, it is deeper than that. It's different from that, because number one, it's not about me, it's about us.
Yes.
So number one, when you look at many ways that we our way of being and our way of even worshiping, we, especially in my Kikuyu tribe, we protected the environment. We used to face Mount Kenya because we are from the center of Kenya, Mount Kenya. So we would face the mountain and we would take care of our nature. So nature is the water, nature is the ground, and nature is the food that we eat, the crop. Nature is the animals around us. And then you mentioned borders. Back then we didn't have this artificial borders. But for example, it could be Kikuyu nation. So the Kikuyu have their own land and they respect, respected boundaries. We had, for example, the Maasai, who are very nomadic, as we know. That's why you can find them in Kenya and Tanzania before we had these borders. We have, for example, the Kalenjin, who are in different countries. We have the Oromo, who are in, Kenya, in Ethiopia. But I think when we had spirituality and not colonial systems of, politics and governance and all this, we did have a level of respect. I do hear people sometimes, Europeans, saying that, kind of to brush off what was done to us. But I hear them saying that, you are at war with each other. And I usually tell them, which tribe? If you know that we were at war with each other, which tribe specifically, or which community specifically, and whom did they attack? To what extent? Because many times people will try to say that to validate their violence. But if we look at our time before we had colonialism, can anyone tell me when we had this level of violence, like we have seen in Namibia with the Germans, like we have seen the Germans right next door to Kenya in Tanganyika, Tanzania now? Have we seen that kind of genocide? Have we seen all this kind of, in Rwanda with Belgium, in Congo? We didn't have that. So when the colonialist comes into a space and tells us the way you worship is primitive, it's black magic, it's evil, it's
witchcraft.
It doesn't make sense to me. Because the ways you brought evidently took a lot of lives, millions of lives. So I want to understand how the role of spirituality and how can we reclaim it, and how can we make it work the way it used to work before we got all these introductions of different ways of being.
Mary, and to everyone, it will never go back to what it was before. I think we need to make peace with that. We can only move forward with new understanding and be better versions of the past. Obviously, we were spiritual, and then there was an interruption, but we can still gain and remember a lot of the things through knowledge systems. And there are books, and I saw someone ask me about some books. At the end, I'm going to mention a few books that I've been reading that has been really helpful. But we really need to get back to understanding who we were, who we are, and who we can become. Number one, we shouldn't want to be like the past. Maybe we can want the values that we had before colonization, but we need to understand that we in a current situation, and we need to really help our people learn and remember who they are so that we can move forward. With that being said, there's a lot of work to be done. And there needs to be a whole culture shift, because African spirituality was part of the culture. It was just every day, how we did things, how we ate. Like you said, people worshipped in different ways, but it was just a natural way of being. And that is one thing we really need to get back. We had also systems of governance. And a lot of people tend to think, when they think about Egypt, which I call Kemet, because it used to be called Kemet, a lot of people tend to think of Kemet as separate from Africa. But Kemet is part of Africa. Egypt is part of Africa, especially ancient Egypt. Most of the people that originally, or the people that lived in Kemet, they migrated two words came out from Central Africa. There was a migration process that took place, and those people obviously adapted and changed their ways of being and living over time. But again, this knowledge is not readily available because people are not seeking it out, and we need to seek out the information that can remind us of who we are and our true identity.
I've got a question.
I would.
Oh, go ahead. Sure.
Sorry, Ola. we seem to be kind of on the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, I would also say, you know, as you look at, you know, we can never go back. I would say yes and no, because there are still places on the continent, and places in the diaspora. So when you think about Santeria, Orisha, you know, Orisha, a new religion, the Yoruba preserve that really well within the context of Brazilian, you know, of Brazilian slavery. So you do have so many Nigerians and Yoruba people who make pilgrimages. And when you think about the continent, you know, my brothers and sisters here who are from West Africa, you know, can understand when you go to a place like Benin, you know, the quote unquote going back, the traditional still resides there in many, many ways. And so what I do say is that you can't go back to the way it was, you know, where it was, because that's just a passage of time thing. And I think you can go back in the way to see how it has evolved in these places like Benin, you know, Santeria in Cuba, or Orisha in Nigeria, and the way it's practiced in Cuba, Colombia, Vodou in Haiti. So, you know, those things. So,
no, I definitely agree with you, Chipo. When I said go back, I didn't mean it like, I meant we cannot go physically go back in time, but we can obviously we can return to our values, we can return to understanding and going to these places where we can receive our power. Many people who are living in the diaspora, if they come to Africa, they will experience a certain level of energy because they are returning to where they have come from. But I simply meant it from the perspective of understanding where we are now, and we physically cannot go back in time, but we need whatever we experience has helped shape us, and we should use this experience to build a better future, not only for Africans, but for all our people of the world. Olu, you had a question?
Yes, I did. I actually had a 2-point question. I think I forgot the other one, but that's fine. I mean, the first question is, what is African spirituality? And I asked that question because, I mean, it's a question that usually comes up around the fact that, you know, the different groups, different people, why do people just like label it African spirituality as if it's kind of like just one thing? It makes it sound very like Afrocentric, or very like, do you get what I mean, in some sense? And it's kind of like usually pushed back, right? I think the other part of my question really is, you know what, I'm going to come back to it. I don't know, it's kind of like put it together very well. So I'll just stick with that question. What really is African spirituality, and how do you sort of like relate with that in the sense, especially for people who haven't been exposed to any of the different groups?
Yeah, very good question, Olo. The first thing we need to define is what is African. Like I said from the start, if you know what African is, then you can go from there. And then you also need to look at what is spirituality. To me, African spirituality is knowing who you are from an African context and just living in your truth. That simple is African spirituality. African spirituality cannot be defined just by one person, because like you said, Olu, different people have different interpretations of what spirituality is and what being African is. But in a nutshell, it's about knowing. It starts with that knowledge base. And that is the defining aspect of African spirituality, in my opinion. For other people, it might be having a base of traditions, African traditions and values that is established where they come from. So it's very much based on where people are coming from and what they value in terms of their traditions, their beliefs, ancestors, gods, and so forth.
I think I remember my second question, but I'll just do a quick follow-up on what you said. I think maybe my understanding is, like, to your point on what it means to be African, is that there's certain value systems that cuts across many African societies. And I think that is true for the most part, right? Like, if you put colonialism aside, I mean, even within colonialism, there's the value systems cut across. Do you get what I mean, right? I mean, it does cut across. So I think the biggest case is the idea that money and the accumulation of things at the expense of other people is not something that we believed in from the very start, right? I think that that's very central. And so whatever you practice, whatever traditions, whether it's spirituality, whether it's values, sort of fit into that value system. Vis-a-vis what I can boldly call the European way of life, which is very individualistic and pursues personal gains and wealth, which is what we now copy, which is terrible for us, and that's why it's not working for us, right? So how you then practice that might be different across board, but it's very central to the idea of community, right? Communalism, right? Which is being connected with each other, understanding that nothing really belongs to you in reality, and it belongs to everyone, so to speak. I mean, the follow-up, the question I was trying to ask earlier was, with respect to traditions, what I've observed, especially with people close to me as well, is that there seems to be this fear when they come across a certain tradition, let's say like the Benin voodoo dance. And I know that it is embedded in the lie of colonialism through religion that says that anything that is different from this thing I have taught you is evil and bad, and you must reject it, you know. And psychologically, it's embedded in our people, such that when we come across these things, we tend to associate them subconsciously with fear. Do you get what I mean? And so we don't even want to. And so you see Africans even say African spirituality or these traditions are evil. They've used, I mean, it's out of misinformation, but how do you get people past sort of that thinking, right? To even be able to embrace tradition or even learn about it, right? To be open enough to understand what it is before actually judging it.
I think that's a very good question. And the things we need to do is, again, tell stories. We need to tell the stories. Our history is also part of our story. So when we talk about African history, when we can show people that African spirituality is older, far older than the modern forms of religions that we have in the world today, then people will start to wonder and question. So some of the things we can do is tell our story, tell African stories. Another thing we can do is ask questions, question people, question their faith in relation to Africa. Ask them, like, why do you think God allowed all these negative things to happen in Africa? And why didn't God come to Africa first? And why did you just go to a certain region of the world and not other regions of the world? These are the questions we should ask people to make them think about what they believe. Again, ultimately, I'm not here to sway anybody. If someone believes and has a spiritual base, I'm not here to tell them and to take them away from that base. If that helps them be a better person, awesome for them. However, we need to emphasize African spirituality and being African. And we shouldn't get caught up in the word spirituality either. It's simply just being and understanding what it means to be, without pretense, without the influence of Europe, without the influence of Western and sometimes we forget Arab influence as well, because the Arab world also affected Africa through colonization, through slavery, and we see it in East Africa especially. We see the effects of the Arab world in Africa. So it's not just the West, it's the East as well. But understanding who we are as Africans and really digging deeper into our stories, because our stories are there, and we are African stories. We are African spirituality is in essence. Ultimately, one more thing I want to add, Olu, we need to also invest in each other as Africans, and we need to start investing in African ideas which promote the well-being of community and not the individual, as per se, as Cheikh mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jayson. And I wanna add something that you just said that's very, very important. I love the energy that you brought to this. I mean, I can really feel it. And I want us to always remember, because when you told us to, we first need to understand what it means to be African. And many times when you're thinking about yourself or the people around you, whether it's your country or your tribe or whatever it is, we define ourselves when it comes to spirituality or religion. We define ourselves mostly using titles and ways that are not indigenous to our different tribes. So already when you see yourself as what you are not, or what you have been told you are, then it's going to be a problem for you to even understand spirituality, because you don't even understand what being African is, right? And I think we need to start being intentional, because that's one thing many of us are not. We know what is right, we know what is wrong. So for example, we talk about religious inclusion, but how many people have we ever seen speaking about African spirituality being included? I know I've been blocked by someone for simply saying, hey, by the way, how come African spirituality is not being included? It's always the Abrahamic religions, the major, and others around the world, the top major ones that are usually centered. And to me, that is intentionally telling an African person that you are less. That is it. Because when you do not intentionally include what our ancestors believed and what we have a right to believe, then you are saying we are less than you. So what I would like to remind everyone is to be very intentional. If you have your way, or if you observe your ways that are tied to your ancestors, that are not foreign, you have every right to be. And don't be ashamed of it. And I understand you want to protect yourself. I understand that you're scared. You don't want to be judged. You don't want to be called a demon. But you know what? That we were here, we've been in Africa since the beginning of time. So you cannot keep worrying about what people who came after are going to think about you, because you were on that land. It's about the land. Your spirituality is the land, and you were there before anyone. So you have to prioritize yourself.
Yeah. So yes, thank you so much, Mary, for putting this panel, because I've learned so much listening to Jayson. Because I love having those perspectives from my other fellow Africans, because he's from South Africa. I might not have really this opportunity to hear his story. That is very interesting. And he mentioned something that reflect the failure of our leaders. How come that we're in the 21st century Africa, all that have been done by Pan-Africanists, we are still hating each other? The episode he mentioned in South Africa, it exists in other countries, not in terms of violence, but the discourse is here. If you go to I would say, to Gabon, you might hear those labels to those from Nigeria or from other Cameroon. If you go to Senegal, you might hear those stories of labeling someone from Guinea as being the one who steal our jobs. You see that it happens everywhere in Africa. That is the problem, and we are not really doing something to come together. We are more likely to connect to others than within ourselves. That is a problem. And also, he mentioned something that is about it is difficult, as Jayson recognized, to really go back, because it is embedded. And what we have to understand is colonization is something that really affects the landscape first. It has been founded on destroying the land and the psyches of those people first. And then when we talk, mostly, even we in the West, sometimes some of us have escaped, because when we define ourselves, we define it in terms that please the other. We do it naturally. When we talk about Africa, we do it in things that we de-Africanize, what I call de-Africanize. We de-Africanize ourselves to look more acceptable to the other. And that is a problem. So I think it is really interesting that we go back, not going back fully, but at least reconstruct with what we have. reconstruct is what we have and connect each other. We have to really have networks, and Mary is doing it, and I appreciate this work that is connecting, promoting. We have to promote those ideas.
Yes.
I would love to learn about his culture, the Xhosa. I have been studying myself because I did not study in school. All that I know about South Africa is I studied myself. I even started studying those African universities, South African universities that have been divided into groups that existed and how they have been colonized and still shaping the country. I have encountered the word kafir. The word maybe speaks to you. The word kafir.
Yeah, an unbeliever.
Yeah, a word that has been used to to label Black people.
I think we need the whole South African. Let me tell you, every time I'm on social media, there's something new, and every time I'm checking, I'm like, okay, why are people doing this? For example, you're talking about xenophobia, and I think we don't really. Again, I think we need a whole session about South Africa, because even when we talk about xenophobia, we don't talk about how the Africans between themselves are not really talking. We don't talk about how, xenophobia is wrong. But then also we also have to talk about as Africans, when I go to another country, how am I supposed to carry myself? Because remember Ubuntu. Ubuntu is not just about saying love each other. It's doing it in action. So when I go online and I see a video of people, fellow Africans, working in ways that are harming the locals there who have fought for their freedom to be there, I'm like, no, don't do that. So we don't talk about why people are fighting. We simply talk about don't fight. And that's amazing. Don't fight. Don't do bad things. But we need to talk about where are we disagreeing? What part? What has happened? What is leading you to feel that you can mistrust me as a fellow African? How can we correct this? But we don't talk about it. We
don't talk about it. Yeah.
We don't talk about what is happening. We're like, okay, love each other. No, that's not how it works. We have to talk about it. And now we are taking Chipo. I'm sorry, Chipo, we are taking a lot of your time. We I think almost 10 minutes past. I want us to introduce us to culture and cooperation. And I know it's linked to everything. And I would have wanted Cheikh to, go more deeper into how, with education, how we can have cooperations with different parts of the world or different cultures to make sure that being Africa is no longer minimized, and that we can actually be seen, we can be heard, and we can be respected and valued like other different cultures. But just introduce to us what you think, what should we be doing, and what kind of stories have we had that have led us to this place where people don't really respect our stories, and people exploit our stories, they appropriate our stories, they do all these things. Even when we cooperate, something is missing. And please introduce us to this. Thank you.
So Chipo Nyambuya, I'm my own personal Pan-African. Like I said, I'm Liberian and Zimbabwean, so I put all in there. As we talk about cooperation in our storytelling, it's as you said, it's all connected. I want to bring in, and I'm sure Olu will wrap it up and bring it home. I want to bring in, where Cheikh started, and then where Jayson ended, is because we don't know our identities, and we don't know the way of being, and our way of being, Ubuntu, because Ubuntu is about cooperation. But because we don't know our way of being, we look to again the way our minds have been constructed, our identities have been constructed, and we then operate in fear. So the whole notion of the nation state is where we need to begin. In that cooperation is, Mary, you said, we have to repair, because essentially that's what you were saying. We have to repair before we can say, okay, let's all get along, stop fighting, and we have to go through this reparation process with each other. within our collective and within the groups of our collective that we then bring together, so we can then define the ways in which we need to start embodying Ubuntu, which is cooperation. I am because you are. So if I don't know what I am, then I will never know what you are. And then we will never know, okay, how do we cooperate on education? How do we cooperate on economics? How do we cooperate on governance? How do we cooperate on movement and migration? How do we cooperate in developing a vocabulary of communication across our boundaries, not so much borders, but across our boundaries? And so, to Cheikhu's point, I think we all really need to reflect on our national identities and patriotism, because that's the first point. We need to really emotionally and spiritually understand that our so-called national borders were carved up by some, in the Berlin Conference, by Bismarck. So the Europeans could stop fighting each other and define how they were going to control and loot our land, our being, our place. And so I think that's the first point. We just have to agree and cooperate on that. And then we start unpacking, okay, here are the realities now. We know the history, and here are the realities. We've now been used against each other in ways, again, going to Cheikh, we've been used against each other in that separation. We've been used against each other to say you're superior, like Rwanda, Hutu and Tutsis. The whole eugenics, we're going to measure the bridges of your nose to say who's going to be more superior over the other. Unpack that. Oh, we're actually of the same place and of the same people. So why are we fighting? And ask the questions, why are we fighting? Okay, I now realize that I've been used, or my leader has been used to gain benefit from me by harming you, as we have, in the civil war in Sudan. So as we do that, we have to be having those conversations ourselves in doing that. And as you look at education, like I said, I'm going to point everyone again to that lecture to Professor Wandia Njoya. That lecture was an interview, a conversation. Wandia Njoya, it's that once we just agree on that, it's then putting the various centers of excellence, i.e. the centers of where we will be having conversations around what conversations are we going to be having around economy? What conversations are we going to be having around migration and movement? Because, again, we have groups who are nomadic groups across the continent. Hausa being one of the largest ethnic group on the continent.
And you're showing you how to change your primary monitor.
Sorry. Okay, no, sorry about that. No, that's okay. So we have, it's placing, all of us placing in our different groups in different parts of the continent creating that soup, we're going to all agree that within this group, we're going to agree that, okay, the group that's going to talk about, migration, migratory, and what that means, the group that's going to talk about spirituality will be placed in this part of the continent. And that's where we will all convene. So that's where we start to begin the nascent, corporations. And then we start to look at, okay, how do we, a lot of my work focuses around cooperative economy. And so it is then, okay, where do we want to place that? In different places on the continent? Where do we want to center? Where do we want to center these again? Where do we want to place these centers where we will be convening and having these conversations, where we will all be from the different regions, and we make our soup, we make our gumbo, we make our Senegalese jollof and our Liberian jollof. And sorry, Olu, those are the two best jollofs. and we then go and decide, and then we cascade it across. We cascade it across the continent so that we all then benefit. So as I said, as I look at economy and historical economy, it is traditional. There are so many traditional ways of trading and agriculture and making market and making economy that we can all benefit from, to then do some harmonized way that we all benefit across the continent. When we look at how we're all carved up to exploit our resources, it is then, oh, okay, you have this here, you have this here, you have this in abundance, you have that in abundance here. We then come to the realization that Africa is truly the only continent that is fully self-sustainable. We don't need anybody. We don't need anybody. And that's why we are divided and conquered, so everyone else can eat off of us. So I'll leave it there, and we can all now kind of like discuss and have questions and think about ways to do that.
I have a question. I'm trying to understand how we can use our different cultures, because people forget that. Even though, like I myself, I do a lot of content in Africa, and I tend to generalize because we have a lot of shared beliefs, we have a lot of shared goals, and shared history as well. But how can we start using culture to build new systems? Because you mentioned things like trade. Now everything is based on profits and who makes the most of them. So immediately we understand that competition is very un-African in that sense, especially when it comes to basic things like food, land, shelter. These are things back then we didn't have the kind of buildings we have now that cost an arm and a leg. Yeah. So it was much simpler back then, but it was basic but functional. And we sometimes see even our designs, like our huts, you're going to see them in exotic or, magazines, or they're going to be somewhere in, it could be Italy or somewhere else. Whether you look at the building, you're like, this looks like a hut in Africa. So our designs and the way we used to build and do things is now being taken by other, society, other communities. Even the way we dress, you're going to see a person on the runway dressed like a Maasai, and that's the latest thing to them. And you're like, what is going on? Or some sort of fabric and design that is from Ghana. And you're like, wait a minute. I know this does not belong to you. So we see a lot of our culture. And I don't think we speak about this enough, because I'm going to be honest with you, my people, the only time we talk about our culture and embrace it mostly is when it has been appropriated.
Exactly.
We wait for someone to steal something from us, to make money from us, and then we claim it. Can we discuss this? Someone help me.
Talk amongst yourselves. No, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, that is the thing. And that's why I'm like, okay, I'm always up, and I think it's because, like I said, it's just naturally in me, it's in my identity. I'm always trying to pull my identities together to have the, just to have these basic conversations. Have you ever, I'm curious to know if you've ever thought, oh, okay, we have, so for example, again, because I was raised here, my mother, so I'm here in West Africa, again, and I was raised here, my formative years were here, my identity was shaped here. And so, when I look at, like I said, the ways of trade and farming and trade, in a lot of West Africa, cowrie shells was currency. So that's the first thing. We can agree on currency and set our own market, little prairie markets, cooperative in little communities, and we then attach the value to what that is. Then we take that into what is our culture now, and okay, we have this resource, we have that. What value are we attaching to the cowrie shell? What value are we attaching to kola nuts? So kola nuts, another form of currency, also used in various ritual practices in West Africa. And so I think it's one of those things where we have to, again, that rethinking, reconstructing our thinking, and not thinking about, not so much not thinking about profit, but redefining what profit is, and suspending our competitiveness that has been infused in us as we've been colonized. Because we have to acknowledge that that is there, and we also have to acknowledge that living in a capitalist world, there are real material needs. And so it's assessing, okay, what do we have that is of material value in a capitalist world? Then we bring that into each other, and then we take it, we value it, we do it, and then we market and take it out to market to get the capitalist value. And then we bring it in. It's, again, continuous cycle of doing that. Things that cost us nothing, or things that we can then contribute and pool, pool our labor, pool our capital value, pool our traditional value to then build and slowly build what is ours. And so that has to come with cooperation. Must come with cooperation. That I'm agreeing, acknowledging, understanding you have this capital, a material need and value, and I can bring this capital, material need and value, but I'm going to need you to bring this piece of it, because when we put it together, okay, then we can take it out and go out to capital market, and then bring back from capital into our market. So,
if you allow me, just want to reflect on. Just want to reflect on what Chipo mentioned. That is very important. That is cooperative economics. We really need to embody that, because one of the principles of the Nguzo Saba, we know, that is Ujama.
Ujama.
We embody it. We have to embody it. We have a teaching of Ujama that is really, for me, rich. But Mary mentioned something that is going on. And we need to really find ways to push it back. That is folklorization.
Yes.
You dress like the Maasai, and African people start liking it because others are liking it. That is the problem. So like we start liking the way we dress as African because others validated it. We see how African people in Burkina Faso, their architecture, we grow up seeing it, but we don't like it. But others start liking it, so we make TikTok videos, we make it like Instagram, and we like it. That is the problem. Even in my own country, Senegal, there are others that I grew up seeing. I did not appreciate it, but now I see it everywhere on TikTok. I see it everywhere on Instagram, and then we say, okay, others like us.
Yeah.
We love when others appreciate and applaud what we do, and that is a problem. And I think
and that's why we don't cooperate, because even when people are creating content or when they are out there, Kenya is a high tourist destination. It's all about pleasing or showing our dance to the world.
Exactly.
I should be showing it to my Tanzanian neighbor, my Senegalese brother. I should be showing it to my fellow people because I want to learn about them as well. But why do we always do things for other people to like us or to see us? Then what?
Exactly. And for that, we need a defolklorization process. That is, we appreciate things, defolklorization, because folklore is something that is really all over the place. And to finish with that point is about farming. Chipo mentioned farming. That is something we need to work on, but not farming the way I see it on Instagram and others, because people if you grow up, if you grow up in Kenya or Senegal or another country, farming because you see your parents are doing it. Because someone has never set a foot on a farm would make content and look it like so beautiful and take pictures and dip into in a farm, and yet that the way he's doing it is not really the way it should be. And so we need to empower women who are still on the market. They have been doing it. It's their way of living and gaining having the capitalist gains. So we need to empower them to do it in a proper way, maybe to make profit and change their lives, but not try to capture and exploit, because we do it. We as African, we exploit those farmers who don't know how to read and how to write. We exploit them. We have those who have their farming field. They produce a lot of eggs. They produce everything, but they don't have the ways to go to the market. Someone who went to the university comes and exploit all that hard work and makes profit. I see it everywhere in Africa. We need to talk about it also.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chipo, for everything you've said. And I'm really happy also, Cheikh, you came in with the Ujamaa because Mwalimu Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Mwalimu means teacher. It's a word of respect, and it also means lecturer, professor. And Cheikh, to me, I actually wanted to call you Mwalimu today. So
Mwalimu.
if I call you Mwalimu in future, you know what it means.
I love him.
and you know what the Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles. Saba means 7. I know it's something that people in the US they observe with Kwanzaa, but this is something that the entire African society already knows. It's only the only difference is that it's not called Kwanzaa, and in Kiswahili Kwanzaa means first. Without the A in the end, because in America they call it Kwanzaa, but in Swahili it's just Kwanzaa, means first. But it's a very important thing. We need to learn how we can start cooperating together. And many times, even when you look at foreigners from the West coming in with all the development and philanthropy and all that, usually they're coming in, they're saying, okay, we need this amount of money because we need to put food on the table of this person, or we want to finance this women in this village to do this. Why can't we do it ourselves? I think Chipo mentioned, one group of people is they have this strength, or they have this, coming from their own land, and this other part of the world has something different. So even within a nation, a country, why have we not been able to say, you know what, we have fish, because we are next to the lake, We are next to Lake Victoria. I don't like that name. So Lake Victoria is very colonial. But, you know, and by the way, now that's a case. They're fighting for the Nile waters. That's another case. I'll talk about it later. But why can't we say, you know what, we have fish, we have this, you have maize, or you have this, and you have this. Why can't we come together? Because we have more of this, you have less of this. Why can't we provide this to this group of people? We don't do it because we've also been taught to be tribalistic. We've been taught to fight one another, like Chipo said. You are from this tribe, so you're better than other people. You're from this tribe, so you're less than other people. But if we didn't have this colonial beliefs, we will be working together to provide for each other what is missing. And that is what it means by ujamaa. So jamaa in Swahili is like a friend. So when we jamaa, it's something, it's about cooperation and coming together. And we do not have ujamaa. We do not have friendliness. We do not have unity, umoja. So these are the things that are missing, and we need to find ways to incorporate them in our businesses and also develop new structures of business, because whatever we have right now, the competition and profits, is not working. We see what's going on in the DRC. It's all about profits, profits, profits. In Ghana, with children going to the cocoa plantations, profits, profits. It doesn't work for us. It doesn't. So we have to find new ways of doing this. So thank you so much.
Mary, for that. There is a book that is, to me, not really considered fully. That is Self-Reliance by Mwalimu Nyerere, Education for Self-Reliance. That book contains cooperative economics and how we should really put into practice our knowledge, basic knowledge for our communities. Education for self-reliance. Yeah.
I think we need to do another session, because like the last time, we didn't have enough time to discuss everything. We need a certain session where we are speaking about, we pick a book from one of our leaders. It could be a past leader or current leader, and we come here and we discuss the teachings from the book. Because many times I think there are so many books to read, but we need to also be intentional, and we decide this is the topic we want to focus on, and these are the people we know that are competent at this topic, and then let's discuss it. Let's be intentional with it. Someone in the comments, I believe it's a Kenyan. Let me just read. Eric Onyango just said, Lake Victoria is not called Lake Victoria, it's called Namlolwe. So usually there are local names. There's usually the Luo names and also the names from the Uganda side. So it depends on where it is. But that's another thing we need to do. Get rid of all these names that do not represent us and our communities. If the lake is not in the UK or in Germany, why do we have a name that is German or, for example, or British? We need to have a name of a river or a lake that is from the community around it, and that's it. So I think now we can discuss the last portion. Olu, please just introduce us to perception and conflict. We've had these conversations before, and we see a clash between what we know and what we've been told about ourselves, what others know about ourselves. So there's so many different stories about one thing, and I see a lot of conflict. And I think it also has to do with, everything is connected, spirituality. If you don't even know what it means to be African, like Jayson said, then you're not going to know what spirituality is. Then also it's going to cause conflict, and then it's going to create perceptions about the people. But please just give us an introduction. Tell us what you think about this. Why are we having conflict? What do we need to change as African people? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. My name is Olusegun Rowaiye. A couple of people here know me. I'm simply just a student of sort of in learning, and wanafunzi, I think is the way it's described here. Learning, and I think the biggest piece I start with really is our societies are still very influenced by two things. I'd say it's violence and money. So, violence from the perspective of, say, the countries we have now, the sort of fear of not just physical violence, but violence from those who run the world financial system in the sense, I mean, if you think about Zimbabwe and some of the things that have happened to Zimbabwe, or if you think about Guinea, or is it Guinea? I can't remember exactly, post-colonization, what France did there before sort of exiting. And so there's still that fear centrally, like around our nations in terms of what they are capable of doing to us, so to speak, right? And then there's money individually, this culture of, making money and being rich and being successful is sort of the way of life now that we've kind of like embraced. And I think that those two things are very key in terms of perception, right? And I feel like this whole conversation has really talked about, if I've learned anything really, is starting from knowing who you are as African, right? And what it means to be African, so that you sort of challenge the status quo in terms of how you think about the world and you think about operating. And why do I say this? I say this because if as a system, we know what it means to be African, we really wouldn't be scared about the violence of the West, because then, to Chipo's point, we realize that we're truly self-sufficient, right? And we don't have to buy all the garbage, right, so to speak, that we think really will make our lives better, right, in some sense. And as individuals too, if we really know what it means to be African, then we realize that this game of trying to become the rich one while everybody else is suffering, so to speak, it really leads us nowhere, even as individuals, because then you become like the very people that came to colonize you, right, which is what we see. And I think I'm really putting this, because I think that's really the perception. That's what drives sort of the perception of ourselves, right? This idea that we have to catch up with the West, right? And in order to catch up with them, we need their help, right? And I think that it's a very, very dangerous way of thinking. The reason why I think it's a dangerous way of thinking is because, and I have said this before, is why do you think that the very people that put you in this position that you are will be the ones who will come to save you or to help you? Like, I mean, this is, I think, I feel like if you could really knock this into people's heads, like if it's, I don't know how to do that, but if you could knock this into people's heads, I mean, even on an individual scale, you will never, I mean, we have this mini conflicts in families and all, where if an uncle was bad to you, there is no way you are like trusting the uncle's son, especially when the uncle like raised the son. You already know there is a behavior without, do you get what I mean, in some sense? But I mean, like I said, the reason why I think we think that way is because of the two things I started with, which is the fear of violence as well as the desire for money, which is the reason why you find some of our Africans, people in high places, I would say, partner with Western systems and corporations because they see some kind of value and benefits, money specifically, that they will get out of it, right? And I think that that's what leads us into conflict. And so how does that lead us into conflict? It's that I want to be better than you, and so by default I have to compete with you, right? So, and if I have to compete with you, I am by default in conflict with you. Now that conflict might not be physically violent at this moment, but it actually has the potential to, and we see it in world politics today, where like nations say that they are, they have this random statements that like, these statements are just very dumb statements, where nations are, oh, we're in cooperation for world peace and all. But I mean, in reality, these guys are really trying to like get the best of each other in some sense. I mean, we see how the West or China and all these guys deal with us, which is trying to get things from us as cheap as possible or even for free, right? Which is some of the drivers of the conflict we have on the continent. But I want to really speak about ourselves. But I'm saying that because we see ourselves in competition to be better, even these countries, this thick borders that we have, we really see ourselves in competition. So that this is the reason why, instead of, say, Rwanda like having peace with the DRC and saying, okay, you know what, how do we both use all of these resources to benefit each other? Instead, one wants to partner with the West, you know what I mean, sabotaging the other one, because they see themselves in competition, right? Which is why they are never cooperating. And I think that perception that we desire to become like the West, right, is, and where did this perception start from? I think this perception started from, I listened to, what is his name? Miles Monroe. If you know Miles Monroe, is but he's one of the most intelligent, you know, I can't even call him a pastor because I don't think he really speaks like a pastor. He is a pastor, but he's very, he understands how the world works. And he said something, the breakdown of Europe, which essentially breakdown of the Roman Empire, was an implosion. And you see all of these countries we see today, Portugal, Anglo, England, Belgium, which were the center point of Europe. They broke out, and because the Roman Empire's ideology was to have influence and dominance across the world, even after that implosion, all of them went on this race to gather that influence. And so what we've seen is that race is what has taken them across the world, because they wanted to build their own individual empires to do all of the violence they've done. So there's this ideology that they have the right to control, the same way the Roman Empire was spanned across parts of the world. Now, what has happened is the fight for that control is what resulted in the Berlin Conference, right? Because it's like, okay, we will fight each other to control these people. But you know what? They realized, okay, you know, we don't want to keep doing that now. Let's settle in some sense, right? But even the World War I, a lot of people have talked about how a lot of the World War impacts was actually driven by countries' dissatisfaction about the level of influence they had in the world. I mean, many people think that's something else, but it's like, oh, Germany was unhappy in some sense that, you know, England and all these other countries who were part of this empire were able to expand so much and they didn't have that much of an influence in some sense, which drove them with this ideology of wanting to take over the world or control the world in some sense. And so I'm saying all these things because I'm linking it to how, even with wars, we tend to embed ourselves into their societies. So when we fought wars, there were African nations who fought on the side of Britain. They were the ones who fought on the side of France. So you see this perception that we are somehow an extension of them. We have become an extension of them. And I think that is what we really need to address. It's why do we subconsciously think we're I mean, you see the idea of the Commonwealth is one of the most disgusting, insulting things ever to me, right? Because, you know, you have the Commonwealth, and I don't know what is common about the wealth, right? It's like these nations that you have exploited over the years, and then you create sporting games so that they continually feel this perception that they're part of this system. It's this influence over them. And you see, this is really the ideology. You know, like for Nigeria, for example, and I'm still talking about perception here, a lot of our initial military leaders who ended up taking over Nigeria post-colonialism were trained by the British military, and we understand how the military works, which means you have this sort of loyalty, this sort of like, do you know what I mean, to within the military, that's how you are trained. So that's why you can see how, like, you know, if Waweru was sick, he will go to the UK, or if Tinubu is sick, he will go to, you know, France, and to go get, you know, because they see themselves as an extension. And when they even steal money, they go there to buy the properties. They don't even keep the money on our continent. So, I mean, you can see how this is so connected. And I think education is really the same. And this is what results in conflict, which is the reason why with Burkina Faso separating from West Africa, you see Nigeria threatening to go to war with Niger and all of that. Why? Because they're doing it on behalf of these other systems that they are embedded. Even with this recent war happening in the Middle East, and you see with Lebanon and France trying to build more influence, there's still this subtle fight amongst colonial masters for influence across the world, in some sense. And so it's how do we remove ourselves from that? Which is the reason why when you see people trying to like say, oh, they're supporting Russia for whatever reason, there's always this internal conflict amongst ourselves. So we're fighting ourselves. Why do you support Russia? Why China? I prefer the West. I prefer this. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, how are we individually still so tied and connected to? And some people believe the West is better. They're not as this as wrong. And I'm like, how is the West better? Like, do you know who did the things that was done to your ancestors? Because we don't remember. We don't know. So we don't know. So I think this is this is what we need to really address, in my opinion. How do we figure out a way to, and I don't think we need to actually come up with anything new. I feel like a lot of our ancestors as scholars have already done the work. The problem is in their work of expanding this knowledge, there was a lot of, I say the system allows you to talk until you start organizing. When you start to organize, that's when they step in. Do you know what I mean? I mean, if you see a lot of like the people who have been banned recently, it's because they started to get this level of influence to change minds, to make people start to rethink. And why? Because how we communicate is still very tied to their own systems, right? So for me, it's how do we influence our societies, our countries as much as possible in a way to create an education system, or at least introduce something that makes them learn the work of scholars before as we build upon it. I think that's something that we really need to address, because if from a very young age you teach the truth about the people that came and invaded us, then when you're an adult, you are not mistaken about who is who. You're not mistaken about the fact that this is what the West has done. And it's easier to have that conversation so you can see the truth. The problem is I can't even have the conversation with somebody who's still blinded by the West, because even when they become enlightened, they fall back to this, my initial point, money, which is, oh, so what do you want me to do now? Do you get what I mean? Like, I need to make money, I need to survive. So I don't really care about those things that you're talking about. Do you get what I mean, right? So, and because they are also in competition with their fellow man brothers, whether in the West or even in Africa, I don't really care about the next person, to me, in the sense, they don't say it that way, but that's the reality, because I have to sort of get that bag and build. And I think this is the center point of, it's the perception of ourselves and how we're still embedded in their systems. We're still a part of their system. There's still colonialism today, right? It's still very much prevalent. But people don't see it as it was, because, I mean, it feels like once there's no physical violence, it's not happening. And so we blame ourselves more. I mean, this is the ideology. The ideology is supposed to blame ourselves as the cause for our, and I'm not saying we don't have responsibility, we surely have responsibility. But the point is that we think that the responsibility is to dig further into copying their way of life. You ask even like if you ask people who are very well educated, in the sense of educated, right, through schools, Western schools, they believe copying the systems that they have, without understanding that their systems work because ours don't. It is a very, very, this is the problem. We think the systems here work or outside work because they are so smart and all of that. No, they have been designated as raw materials center of the world, which is the reason why the only development that the foreign investor who you're pursuing after will invest in is one that furthers extraction. And so you see, everybody is now in competition for who can attract that investor to come and extract so that you can make some money. And we speak legalese and English to say how that will trickle down and be a benefit. One thing I think we also need to do going forward is to have experts within economics and all of that actually call out the goals that have been written by all this, because I mean the World Bank and IMF and some of these NGOs, they sell this ideology of being helpful, and many people buy into it a lot. A lot of our young people really want to work for them, and I get that. I understand it. But we need to go and look at what has been the real results over the last 50 years since they've been saying they want to improve our societies and all. And then say, if this is the result and this is what the goals have been, why have our societies become poorer in the sense? So, I mean, this is the kind of things that we need to actually start having conversations about, debates amongst scholars, experts, economists, because they are the ones who further the ideology within our systems. Because we can see the trend today, and I'll end here, is the trend today is really not to use the European as a face on the continent. It is actually to use the African black face in some sense. And so because of that, we need to be able to actually ask ourselves questions and say, what you are preaching does not make any sense, because over the years you preached this and we have not gotten the results. So I think that the core is that educational piece, is how do we influence our societies to start to teach the truth based on scholarly work that has already been created, and how do we build on top of that? How do they teach that from the get-go, from like primary school, from a very young age, so that when you're growing up, you understand yourself, You understand what your ancestors experienced. And so nobody can lie to you that the reason why you're not doing well is because you are just not doing well, or you're not smart and you have to copy them. I mean, I think this is really the center point. I mean, I'd be happy for people to contribute their thoughts, but this is how I see the perception and conflict come together that continues to destabilize us, where there's now increasing conflict day and day and day because people are trying to sort of be the one who wins, right? The one who comes out at the top, the model African nation. You know, the people say how Rwanda is so clean and so beautiful and all, but nobody knows the intricacies of the conflict and how some of these countries are involved. But you see on the surface that, you know, I want to visit Rwanda. Wow, the leader is so great. It's so beautiful. I mean, this is the real problem, right? So I think it's that lack of education, information, that continues to perpetuate the idea that we are the reasons why we are where we are, and that the only way to get out of it is to copy the same people that put us in the mess.
Thank you so much, Olu, and you've made me think about so many things. And I'm already, for example, I'm thinking of I went to this live the other day, and they were talking about the difference between how children in Africa are raised and children abroad are raised, mostly in the West. And you will not believe it, but a lot of people agreed that the way we are raised is worse and why we are losing to everyone else. And in the same breath, everyone was praising how children in the West are raised. Now, don't get me wrong. Things like, you know, if you beat a child, I mean, that's wrong. I don't care where you are. And I don't care if you're going to use a colonial handbook, literal colonial handbook, to justify you beating a child. I don't want to know what the colonial god said that allows you or makes you think that you should beat a child like mad. But I reminded all these people that, I mean, how can you be praised? How can you be putting down your own children and saying they're growing up to be thieves, and then praising the children of Europeans and saying that's why they win over everyone, that's why they are rich, that's why they are developed, and then forget that to get that development, they have to victimize and oppress your children. How could anyone forget all that? Do you see how colonized we are? You blame the person who's victimized for not having the wealth of the West, and praise the child of the West for being able to victimize and oppress your own child. What is going on here? It's unbelievable to me, and this is where the conflict comes in. And you also mentioned about how historically we've always had this link to the Commonwealth and everything. It makes us feel included or the same as the UK. We are not. Britain, we are not the same. But then even now, when something happens, whether it's a genocide, whether it's economically, Africa is expected to choose a side. And now I'm going to focus specifically on economics. We are expected to choose, is it China, is it Russia, or the West with economics? Why are we expected to choose? Why can't we simply just prioritize ourselves and our wealth and our resources and our labor? And I see a lot of young people in Africa emulating or aspiring to be like Donald Trump or Elon Musk. And I'm like, okay, you want to be rich, but when did we get here that a young man grows up looking forward to being like Donald Trump? Like, where did we go wrong?
For me, it's the Elon Musk. I'm like, how do we not realize Elon Musk is wealthy, built on the literal backs of Africans? His wealth is ours. It is stolen. How do we not? You know, I had a conversation with that last night. I'm like, I will never buy a Tesla. Because first of all, he is completely anathema to what Tesla stood for. That's the first thing. Second thing, he didn't innovate Tesla. He bought Tesla. Third thing, which is really back to the first thing, his wealth is off of the backs of Africans. literal Africans who are living today. So it's not
Yeah.
history,
Why do we
it's
praise
a
it?
memory.
Why don't we love each other? I mean, why don't we love one another? Like, that's the one thing, because I talk a lot about Africa, and that's the one thing I don't understand. Because we say, you know, we have this culture, everyone is trying to steal from us, everyone is oppressing us, everyone is all just doing this. But then we are the same people who are saying, yes, Elon, we are the same people who see people who look like us leading organizations. I'm not going to mention their names, but they're deep in the minds of the DRC. And we're there
Oh,
celebrating.
absolutely.
Oh, you
Yeah,
have a
but
new job here. Like,
I'm going to say the reason why is, I mean, I'm a young man, so I know that when I was younger, my parents wanted specific things for me, which is they wanted the colonial idea of what it means to be successful.
Mhm.
This is where it really starts, right? It's like, oh, we want you to be an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. And the purpose of being an engineer, doctor, a lawyer is so that you're recognized and so that you make money. And so it starts with the education. And that's why all the young people want to become Elon Musk. And I tell people, I said, if you bring any rich person to, I don't want to say Africans, across the world, really, but I mean, since we're talking about Africans, they will believe that rich person says, which is the reason why some people believe people who are fraudsters and all of that. Why? Because all they see is this person has money, and that is all that matters. And that's the real problem. That's why most intellectual people who have done the work of understanding society sometimes don't come across, because you know what? They don't see anything to show for. Like if you can't show them the Gucci bag or the Fendi wallet, which the design are designs stolen from some of our communities and used as the brands that have made so much money today. If you don't show them that, then they don't want to listen to you. And so they will listen to somebody who's abusing them because the person has money. And this is the problem, right? Because and one of the things that pissed me off a lot, like one time, was when something happened in France. And of course, I don't want anything negative happening in France. Like, I'm not desiring that. Like, that's really not my business. But I saw so many people say pray for France. And it just bothered me how, like, so much conflict in Africa. And I've never heard, like, any of these folks say, pray for this African country. And this is my point when I say they really think that they are very much, connected and embedded in these societies, because they are more moved to pray for France when there's a crisis or anything there than they are. Why? Because France is rich. How did France get rich? They don't care how France got rich.
Exactly.
The point is France is rich. That's really the problem. And so it's changing that ideology of even our parents and telling them, why do you want this person to be a doctor and engineer? If it's not to serve their community while making a good living, of course, then like, it's pointless, because then you have people who have their idols as Elon Musk and these other people.
Yeah.
That's really the problem.
I wanted to say, Mr. Shai, you said we're our own worst enemy, engineered or not. The thing is that we have to care that it's engineered. That's where we have to first ask the question, because we don't get out of it. Doesn't change unless we look at, oh, this is engineered. How do we now reverse engineer it? And we have to have those courageous, difficult call out to call any questions, because we won't reverse engineer it until we acknowledge it and then start to deconstruct, as Chipo was saying, earlier. And I think the other question that we have to have is the first question we have to ask is, about our leaders. Do we think that they are our leaders? Do we think, this sham democracy that that the West spreads and uses against Africans as a bludgeon when we look at ICC, sham democracy and sham human rights, and we talk about our leaders without interrogating, especially those of us who are aware, without interrogating whether or not they are actually our leaders, because we know these systems are not ours, and these systems keep producing these replicable people. So how we need to really interrogate that. And as the Kenyan youth, as the Nigerian youth, as the Burkinabe youth have fought to really say, okay, if you are not us, and you're not African, because what we're seeing and what we're interrogating is that you're really, again, black, white mask, black faces, white mask. So, that's a big part of the interrogation that we have to do in doing that. Because it's easy, it's too facile to blame our leaders when we know, at whatever level it is, we know they're not our leaders. They were not even put there. There's a reason why, almost without exception, every leader at independence was either exiled, murdered, killed, without exception.
Yep. Can I just add something to this point?
Yeah. We're almost out of time, so
Yeah.
I think everyone can just do their closing statements.
Yeah.
And 1 minute first. So Shai, I've seen your comments. You've made a lot of comments. I'm really happy, and I agree with what you said. And I left a note there that if you wanted to come up and say something, if you're okay with being recorded, you're fine. I'm fine with you doing that. Then you can put on your camera, but you would have to first let me know in the comments. So I see all your comments, and I also see Eric's comments about having a project on decolonization that was shelved because there was they didn't agree on what exactly that means, because I think we're very colonized, and we call it being westernized, and it causes a bit of conflict. So I see your comment as well, Eric. And we are almost out of time, but we can just take a minute, everyone, to just give us a closing statement, and then thank you.
Okay, I'll start, and I just want to say thank you to Mary. I want to say thank you to the panel, and I want to thank everybody who attended the session. All the comments, all the questions were amazing. We should definitely do this again. Michelle asked a question at the end. How do we make changes? What actionable ways? We need to, number one, support each other. We need to support each other. We need to have more of this, and we need to continue having conversations. I heard someone say Africans talk too much. We need to continue talking. It's part of our culture. Let's talk. Secondly, we also need to change and understand new ways of being, and study African ways of being. Learn all about Africa, from Cape to Cairo, right through. Learn about African history, but also learn about the history of the world. We also need to understand who our enemy is and how they operate and how they think. They are very organized. How do they do it? Learn from them. I don't even like to use the word enemy, but unfortunate, what they are doing to us resembles what enemies do. And that's the truth. One more thing, we are out of alignment. We need to get into alignment. We need to understand that African time is essential to us. And when does African time starts and ends? Our year starts in September. That's when our year starts, not in January. That is a European lie. Even they shifted. Their year originally started in March. That's when their year started. But through the imperialism, they changed it from March to January. And then we just adopted their calendar system. We need to have an African calendar system, and we need to govern ourselves by that African calendar system. I propose we actually in the year 12,024, not 2024. This is not 2024. That's a European idea that we, in that year, we are much further along. And these are the things we need to perpetuate and drive to bring about true change. It's the small things that we can do, like Michelle said, small things that can bring about bigger conversations and more actions. And with that, I yield my time. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, everybody. Cheikh, Chipo, I learned so much from all of you, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you all. Mary, we look forward to the next one. Mary, thank you again for convening. Cheikh, we're going to be talking. We're all going to be talking.
Sure.
Talking and building, talking, doing, and building.
So, thank you, Mary, again for this panel. I have learned so much listening to my fellow Africans, and these great comments from Demola, Mitchell, and Sasha. Their comments are really something that should be put into the panel. It is so interesting. I've learned so much reading them. So, and they have very good questions also. But what I have to say, and we all pointed that out, is we have to identify those new forces that contribute to disunite us. Those forces that lead us to hate ourselves, because we hate ourselves. Maybe it is unconscious, but we see the hate. We are more open to those people from Europe than to our fellow Africans. That is a problem. How come that today we have summit that is between Africa and China? Africa welcomes all African leaders. Come and recite your lessons. I'm going to tell you what to do. And we have the summit between Africa and Russia, a summit between the US and Africa, a summit between France and Africa, a summit between the UK and Africa. Every year, they respond to the call, and then we want to hear what you're up to. And we recite the lessons. We do it. This is a problem. And, when I compare the work of our former leaders, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, all these leaders who are Pan-Africanists, and what we see today, I see like those comprador elites. They are the intermediaries between the colonial masters and their people. So we need to really work on our priorities. Priority is the key. Our priorities, see our local communities, listen to their voices, and take those concerns. I think this is the way forward. We would not go forward if we are to love Africa because others love Africa. The way they love Africa is something that is not based on really on love. It's not love. They have their own way of loving Africa. Let me just finish by mentioning the fact that every time I have a conversation with others who are not from Africa, they come to me asking me questions about Africa. When I start giving my answers, I see frustration on their faces because what I say does not fit the narrative. They already have the answers, but they want me to talk about Africa that is crying, Africa that is always dancing, and they would put their comment like, wow, look, they're still happy unless they don't have, and yet they have nothing, and they're still happy. I don't talk about that. Africa is a rich place. We have dignity. We have something to offer to the world, and we are still standing up, and we should now promote that idea through our schools, and from then on, we'll build our community and recapture some percentage of what we have lost. Thank you so much. I have learned so much listening to all of you, and I hope that we will continue this conversation. Let's continue it and not break it. Yeah, thank you.
As I've said before, because we have some panelists who returned from the first time. So the new ones in this session, I hope you know you're going to be returning because I will be expecting you back. And it's an African thing. You don't go and never return. That's a bad thing. So when you visit, you come again because you have a new home here now. So I would want us to plan something else. And I see a lot of people have, they're asking questions and they also want to learn. Someone even asked about the kind of books, which books to recommend to them. So I do now recommend that we should have another session where we actually go deeper into some books. So we can have a few of you and everyone discusses and we can pick a topic and let's learn together. Because again, this is how we used to learn. It's not about going in a corner and learning by yourself. You sit together in a group and you have a discussion and that's how you learn. That's the best way to learn. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much for being the walimu. That's plural for mwalimu. Thank you for being the walimu. And thank you for even the questions and being open to learning, being open to making mistakes. And this is what it's about. And this is what we are doing now. We are observing our culture and we are doing the Ubuntu, the Utu, knowing you're a human being, I'm a human being, and we're human together, not separately. So thank you so much, everyone. Everyone who attended, I see you, I see your comments. I'm so honored that you have so much to share. And this is why I even suggested if anyone wanted to come up on camera to do it. And I did that because I see you and I see you have so much to share. So send me a message if you're in the comments, if you want to join me next time, maybe as a panelist as well. You're free to do this. And again, Asanteni Sana, thank you. Thank you so much.